Welcome to SQL Learning Session. Today we'll be talking about aggregating rows from Database for Developers. In this tutorial, we'll learn how to summarize data using aggregate functions and group by. And the test data will be used, the toy data will be using is bricks data. This lesson has 9 sections, including introduction, which I already mentioned you about, and remaining 8 sections are aggregate function, distinct versus all, grouping aggregates, filtering aggregates, and generating subtotals, and some exercises. So let's dig into it. Let's run this SQL statement to see what we have in the bricks data, toy data. This is a toy data set called bricks. It has 3 columns: color, shape, and weight, and it has 6 rows. Moving on to the next section called aggregate functions. Aggregate functions combine many rows into one. Query returns one row for each group. If you use this without group by, you get one group. So the query returns only one row. For example, count returns number of rows the query processed. So this query gets one row, showing me how many rows there are in the bricks table. For example, this query will tell you how many rows are there in the table. When I run this query, can you tell me what the value it will return? Let me run this and see for yourself. It returns 6. Count is unusual for accepting star. This means this returns total number of rows. You can also pass expression to it. This returns number of non-rows for a particular column. For example, the following query shows you how many rows are there in a how many rows are there where color is not null. Let me run this. This shows you how many rows are there in bricks where color is not null. All other non-count aggregates use an expression. Oracle database includes many statistical aggregate functions. Common ones include sum, minimum, maximum, average, standard deviation, median, variance, stats mode. Following query show these actions for yourself. Now let me run this. And tell me how many rows this will return. Let me run this. This return one rows, an aggregate row for a whole table for each function: sum, minimum, max, average, standard deviation, median, variance, stats mode. There are many other functions you can see in the website. Third function, distinct versus all. Can you tell me what is the difference between distinct versus all? By default, aggregate functions use every input value, but must allow you to work on unique values. from table. Use this with distinct keyword. Distinct allows you to work with only distinct rows from the table, whereas all allows you the all the rows from the table. For example, you can find number of different values in a color column by passing distinct color to the count function. There are three colors: red, green, blue. Now let me run this query and see what we get. This shows that this table has three distinct colors. You can also tell the database to use all and can be explicit, but all is optional. There's no need to specify all, but there's need to specify distinct if you want distinct values. Another synonym for distinct is unique. Let me run this. This shows that there are overall 6 colors in the column color, but only 3 are distinct. And synonym for distinct is unique. That's what's showing here. You can use the distinct in most stats function like sum and average. Now let me show you how to use distinct in the stats function. Here we have sum and average as stat function and we are using distinct in those functions. What does it do? The sum without distinct takes all the weight values in the column weight and computes the sum. Similar thing with the average. But when you put distinct weight, the first step is to get a distinct value from the weight column and then calculate the sum. Similarly, doing same with the weight. Now, let me do an exercise where we need to compute it. We'll write a query to compute number of different shapes, standard definition of unique weights. Now, we will fill this number of shapes. Number of different shapes. That means we want different number of unique shapes in the from the database. And secondly, we need distinct with standard deviation. This query will compute what? What does it do? Can you tell me? This query first does is that it takes a distinct shape from the shape column and then counts the number of shapes, distinct shapes. Secondly, it counts a distinct weight from it selects a distinct weight from the weight column and then computes the standard deviation on that select weights and will give you a result. That is what it's supposed to do. And we get is 3 in 1. This is exactly what we need. Moving on to section 5, grouping aggregates. You can split the result into, when we are doing grouping, you can split the result into separate groups. Instead of one row for whole table, you can split the sum average into different groups based upon your needs. To do this, you need to group by. When you do this, it will compute the sum average for each of the unique values in the particular column that is inside the group by function, that is associated with the group by function. Now let me run this query and show you. Now when I compute this query, can you tell me what this will return? Let me show you. What's happening is there's a count, which is an aggregate function, and it is counting number of rows associated with the color column, each unique value of color column, which are red, green, blue, and it is counting the number of rows associated with those. You don't need to include all columns in a group by in your select clause. The following space rows by color as above, but exclude color from the output. You don't need to include all the columns in a group by in your select statement. Following space rows by colors as above, but excludes color from the output. And there is no any indication of what color it is, just gives you number of rows. This can be confusing, so it is good idea to include all group columns in your select statement. So what I'm saying is that it is good to match all the group columns with the select statement and all the select statement with the group columns. If you match those, then you won't have any problem. Now let me run a query. If you run this query, what do you think you will get? This gives an error when you run this query because the group by columns and select columns are not equal, not identical. Now let me run this. It should work because group by columns and select columns are identical. Now let's do an exercise. When you compute the following query, return total weight for each shape stored in Bricks table. Group by shape, shape weight, what does result mean? I just ran a query. What does result mean? What it's doing here? Can you tell me? It is grouping. The result is taking the rows from Bricks table and grouping the result by shape column. And for each shape value, unique value, it is calculating sum of the weight associated with those shape. And for as a result, we have cube equal to 5, cuboid is equal to 1, and pyramid is equal to 4. And that's the result exactly what we need. Moving on to section 7, filtering aggregates. Database process group by after where clause. So following excludes a row weight less than or equal to 1 from the count. Let me run this query. What it's doing is that it's taking rows from Bricks table and only selecting those rows whose weight is greater than 1. Once we have that, it is grouping by color and then counting number of rows for each of the value for color. You can only filter unaggregated values in where clause. If you include aggregate functions here, you'll get an error. For example, let me run this query and see for yourself. When I run this, it should give me error because I'm including an aggregate function in where clause. There you go. To filter aggregate functions, you have to use having clause. This clause can go before group by or after group by. There is your preference. Now, I am writing these two queries, and can you tell me what it does? This query takes the result from the bricks and groups by color, and then for each color value, unique color value, it does a count of the rows, and then it only shows you rows that have count is greater than 1. That's all it does. Let me run this. And as a result, we have two rows where red equal to 3 and blue equal to 2. Let's see if we just do without having, then you would have one row, additional row where grid equal to 1. Moving on to section 8 is an exercise where we have to complete a following query to find a shape which have a total width less than 4. Total width less than 4, where we have to do shape by shape and having some width less than 4. So there's a one row for that where the width is equal to 1, and what's doing here? What is the SQL is doing here? Can you tell me? This SQL is taking rows from bricks, grouping by shape, and calculating sum for all the rows associated with each unique value of shape, and then filtering only those rows and showing you only those rows where shape, where weight of the sum of the weights for is less than 4. And when you do that, you get only one row where shape is cuboid and weight is equal to 1, and rest are filtered out. Now, the last section, generating subtotals. There are two ways to generate subtotals. One is by rollup and one is by cube. What is rollup? Can you tell me? Rollup generates subtotals for the columns within it, working from right to the left. Now, when you have a rollup color shape in the provided function, then you have three groupings. One grouping is for each unique combination of color and shape. That's one grouping. Second grouping is a each unique value for color, and third grouping is grand total. So you get only three groupings for that. Grouping using every column in a row are regular rows. Those based on a subset are superaggregate rows. For these superaggregates, database returns null for group columns. Now let me run this. Here you should get three groupings. One for each one for each. One for color, one for color, one for color and shape, and one for grand total. So you see, this is one grouping, this is same grouping, this is a group number two, this is group number two, and here this is group number three. So yeah, you get three groups. What it's saying is that it takes a red color and calculates a red cuboid and counts the number of rows associated with that, and finally calculates the subtotal for red. Similarly, it does the same thing with the blue, and finally you have a total for all the tables in data set. You can combine rollup with the non-rollup columns. In this case, grand total is for columns outside the rollup. Let me show you. Here, you'll get the you'll get the total for each combination of color and shape plus subtotal for each color from by running this query. When you run this query, you get a total for each combination of color and shape plus subtotal for each color because color is outside the rollup, and you will not get this is a grand total in fact. Now, cube. Cube calculates a subtotal for every combination of columns within it. So if you have a cube, color shape, then you get each combination of color shape, each color, each shape, and all the rows in the table. That's why you get 2 power n. And this is the result you get. In the end, let me quickly summarize what we learned today. We learned about aggregating rows. To that end, we talked about different kind of aggregate functions like sum, average, standard deviation. We talked about distinct versus all, where all is optional. We talked about grouping aggregates using group by. We talked about filtering aggregates using having. And we also talked about generating subtotals using cube and rollups. So that's all for today. I will see you in the next learning session. Thank you so much.